My name is Ivy. At 27, my mother's voice dissolved 7 words into static that filled my Boston studio. Don't come home. Victoria doesn't want drama. The line went dead before I could answer, leaving only the hum of the radiator. Outside, the city was shrouded in gray slush that swallowed sound and color. I stared at my reflection in the window, a ghost in silk, framed by a family that saw me not as kin, but as a liability, a depreciation on their emotional balance sheet. 3 days later, I sat alone at the Gilded Reserve, dissecting the family at the next table with surgical precision. Then I saw it. Not grand betrayal, but a crack. My mother on Instagram, hours ago, with a photo of a table set for 5. The 6th chair was gone. The symmetry was perfect. That was the switch. My sorrow calcified, metallic and cold. I was no longer a daughter mourning exclusion. I was an auditor reviewing a fraudulent contract. 5 years later, the debt came due. I stood at the head of a new table, watching my biological parents scan the room, searching for the daughter they thought they could erase. They didn't notice the 14 handwritten letters sitting unopened in my drawer, the dormant evidence of their silence. They never checked the fine print of their own abandonment. And then the number dropped. 27. 27 years of being the spare part, now distilled into a single moment of absolute, crushing recognition. They weren't looking at a victim anymore. They were looking at the architect of their obsolescence. If you held the blueprints to your own erasure, would you rebuild the bridge to those who burned it? Or would you light the match that turns the ashes into your foundation? November 21st. I remember the date because the air in my tiny Boston studio smelled like the cheap pumpkin spice candle I'd lit to force some holiday spirit into my life. My suitcase was half-packed on the bed, next to a non-refundable economy ticket that had cost me 2 weeks of overtime. When my phone rang, I smiled. I actually smiled. I thought it was Mom asking what time my flight landed, but I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. "Don't come home this year," she said. 7 words. That was all it took to shatter the illusion I had spent 27 years building. Her voice wasn't angry. It was flat, indifferent, like she was canceling a dentist appointment, not her own daughter. In the background, I could hear the muffled roar of a football game on TV. Dad was there. He was sitting right there in his recliner, probably rubbing his forehead, listening to her erase me. And he didn't say a single word. "What do you mean?" I asked, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I already bought the ticket." "Bella is pregnant again," Mom said, as if that explained everything. "She's fragile right now. She doesn't need the stress. You know how you get, Ivy. Your energy, it just tires her out. She doesn't want the drama." Drama. Their word for my existence, for my requests to be treated as human. I sat on my bed, lungs empty. It wasn't just that they didn't want me. It was the specific malice. They blamed my existence for my sister's stress. "But it's Thanksgiving," I whispered. "I'll be quiet. I won't say anything." "It's already decided," she cut me off. "Just stay in Boston. It's better for everyone." The line went dead. I didn't cry immediately. I just sat there, listening to the silence of my apartment, while the memories I had tried to suppress came flooding back like black water. This wasn't the first time. It was never the first time. I remembered my 16th birthday. I had planned a bowling party for months, but the next morning Bella failed her calculus test. She came home crying, throwing things, demanding attention. Mom looked at me and said, "We can't celebrate while your sister is hurting. Don't be selfish." My party was canceled. We spent my birthday eating takeout in silence while Bella sobbed on the couch. Then there was my college graduation. I was the first one in the family to graduate with honors. I stood on that stage, scanning the crowd, desperate to see them. Empty seats. They showed up 2 hours late because Bella had a migraine that couldn't wait. "You understand, sweetheart," Dad had said, looking everywhere but at my eyes. "Your sister needs us." I finally understood the role I had been cast in. I wasn't a daughter. I was the peacekeeper. I was the shock absorber. I was the scapegoat, designed to carry the family's burdens so Bella, the golden child, could shine without consequences. If Bella was the painting, I was just the frame, necessary to hold it up, but invisible when you looked at the art. And now, they didn't even need the frame anymore. I looked at the plane ticket on my bed. Non-refundable. $300. That was a lot of money for a junior architect living on ramen noodles. My mother didn't offer to pay me back. She didn't even think about it. To them, my money, my time, my feelings, they were all disposable resources. I stood up and walked to the full-length mirror leaning against the wall. The girl staring back at me looked tired. Her eyes were red. She looked like a victim. She looked like someone who was about to spend Thanksgiving eating a frozen dinner alone in the dark. But then, something shifted. The heat in my chest wasn't sadness anymore. It was cold. It was ice cold. "No," I said to the empty room. I wiped my face. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. They wanted me to be invisible? Fine, I would disappear from their lives. But I wouldn't disappear from the world. I grabbed my coat. I wasn't going to stay in this apartment. I was going to the most expensive restaurant in Boston, the one I could never afford, the one where the old money families went. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the best thing they ever did for me. They thought they were breaking me, but they were just breaking the chains. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The sad daughter was gone. Someone else was looking back. I picked up my keys. I had a dinner reservation to make. And I had no idea that the strangers sitting at the next table were about to change the entire trajectory of my life and destroy the family that just disowned me. The snow in Boston wasn't the pretty kind that covers everything in white. It was gray slush, freezing on the pavement outside my window. Inside my studio, the silence was heavy, broken only by the rattle of a radiator that sounded like a dying lung. It was Thanksgiving morning. I knew I shouldn't look at my phone. I knew it. But trauma is an addiction, isn't it? You always go back to check if the knife is still sharp. I opened Instagram. There it was. Bella had posted it 10 minutes ago. "So grateful for family," the caption read. "These are the people who matter most." I stopped breathing for a second. I zoomed in on the photo. It was a picture of the dining table in our childhood home in Chicago. My mother prides herself on her table settings. Perfect spacing, crystal glasses aligned to the millimeter, napkins folded like origami swans. It was a display of perfection. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. I counted the chairs. Mom, Dad, Bella, her husband, and a high chair for their toddler. 5 chairs. There wasn't even an empty space left for me. Usually, when someone is missing, you leave a gap. You leave a place setting to show that their absence is felt. But they hadn't just excluded me. They had erased me. They had dragged the chairs closer together to cover the hole where I was supposed to be. It was seamless. A perfect, unbroken circle that didn't include me. The visual evidence was undeniable. They weren't just keeping the peace. They were relieved I was gone. I was a structural flaw they had finally patched over. I sat back on my cheap futon, the springs creaking under me. I looked around my apartment. It was ironic, really. By day, I'm a restoration architect. I work on million-dollar facades in Back Bay. I spend my life analyzing load-bearing walls, calculating stress points, and reinforcing structures that are about to collapse. I know how to save things. I know how to find value in ruins. But here, I was living in a 400-square-foot box with peeling paint, saving every penny I earned, wearing thrift store clothes, all while my sister wore designer dresses, which I essentially paid for by not being a burden. I had spent my life trying to reinforce a family that was built on a foundation of rot. I was the load-bearing wall they kept hammering at, hoping I wouldn't crack. And looking at that photo, I realized the wall had finally come down. I didn't cry. The tears I had shed yesterday felt like they belonged to a different person, a weaker person. I looked at the frozen dinner in my freezer, a sad, single-serving turkey meal I had bought to punish myself. "No," I said aloud. The sound of my own voice startled me. The peacekeeper would eat that frozen dinner. The peacekeeper would stay in this dark room and accept her erasure. But the peacekeeper was dead. She died the moment she saw that closed circle of chairs. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside the practical work clothes, the flannels and jeans, and pulled out a black dress. It was silk, sleek, and elegant. I had bought it for a firm gala 2 years ago, a gala I never attended because Bella had called me, sobbing about a fight with her husband, and I had stayed home to talk her through it for 4 hours. I put the dress on. It fit like armor. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to the Gilded Reserve. It was the most exclusive restaurant in Boston, the kind of place my parents read about in magazines but could never get into. I didn't have a reservation. I didn't know if they would even let me in. But I grabbed my coat and walked out into the gray cold, leaving the ghost of Ivy Chen behind in that studio. I thought I was just going for a meal to prove I existed. I had no idea I was walking straight into a collision course with the only people powerful enough to turn my erasure into a weapon. The heavy oak door of the Gilded Reserve swung open, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the warmth. It was the smell. It smelled like aged oak, truffle oil, and old money. I stepped inside, shaking the slush off my boots, feeling instantly underdressed in my coat, even with the silk dress underneath. But I didn't turn around. I walked up to the hostess stand like I owned the building. "Reservation?" the hostess asked, her eyes flicking down to my wet boots and then up to my face with a practiced, polite disdain. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Just one." She blinked. "Just one? On Thanksgiving?" "Just one." She led me through the dining room, and my architect's brain instantly started dismantling the space. Most people saw luxury. I saw load-bearing deception. The ceiling was a masterpiece of restored Gothic arches, likely plaster over steel beams, designed to make you feel like you were dining in a cathedral. The lighting wasn't just bright, it was ambient, strategically placed in the crown molding to cast zero shadows on the diners' faces. Everyone here looked 10 years younger and $1 million richer. It was a masterclass in illusion. She sat me at a small two-top near a velvet curtain, slightly hidden, as if my solitude might be contagious to the happy families around me. I didn't mind. From here, I had a perfect view of the room. I picked up the wine list. My hands were trembling slightly, not from cold, but from habit. For 27 years, I had been trained to be cheap. I was the girl who ordered water with lemon to save $3 so I could lend Bella money for her emergencies. I was the girl who ate leftovers so my parents could buy Bella a new dress for a party I wasn't invited to. The prices on the menu made my stomach tighten. $300 for a bottle. That was my electric bill. That was 2 weeks of groceries. But then I remembered the empty chair in the Instagram photo. I remembered the 5 chairs squeezed together to erase me. A sommelier appeared at my elbow. "Can I start you with something, miss?" I looked at the price again, my heart hammered against my ribs. "The Cabernet," I said, pointing to the second most expensive bottle on the page. "The 2015. He raised an eyebrow. "An excellent choice. Shall I bring a glass?" "Bring the bottle," I said. As he walked away, I felt a rush of adrenaline so sharp it felt like vertigo. I was burning money. I was setting fire to the responsible ivy they had created. It felt terrifying. It felt amazing. While I waited for my rebellion in a bottle, I looked at the table next to me. They were close enough that I could touch their tablecloth if I leaned over. It was a family of 4, an older couple, a son around my age, and another younger man. I watched them the way a scientist studies a new species. They were the Sterling family. I recognized the father, Arthur Sterling, from the hospital donor plaques I'd seen in my firm's portfolio. But I wasn't looking at their wealth. I was looking at their architecture. In my house, dinner was a contact sport. You had to shout to be heard. You had to interrupt before someone criticized you. If Dad was talking, you shut up. If Bella was crying, you stopped eating. It was chaotic, loud, and exhausting. But this table? It was quiet. The father was leaning in, listening to the younger son speak. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking around the room to see who was watching. He was looking at his son's face with total, undivided attention. The mother, an elegant woman with silver hair, placed her hand on the older son's arm, not to restrain him, but to connect. Nobody was interrupting. Nobody was fighting for airtime. I watched the older son, the one around my age, say something that made the whole table laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh. It wasn't at anyone's expense. It was warm. It was a sound I had never heard at my own dinner table in 27 years. The waiter arrived and poured my wine. The dark red liquid swirled in the crystal glass. I picked it up. It cost more than my plane ticket home. I took a sip. It tasted like oak and berries. It tasted like rent money. It tasted like freedom. I looked back at the Sterling table, and for a split second, the older son, Julian I would later learn, looked up. His eyes locked onto mine. He didn't look away immediately. He didn't look at me with pity because I was eating alone on Thanksgiving. He looked at me with something else. Curiosity? Recognition? I held his gaze for a second too long, my heart skipping a beat. I was an intruder in their temple of happiness, a refugee from a war zone watching peace negotiations. I quickly looked down at my glass, my face flushing hot. I thought I was safe in my shadow, just an observer. I didn't realize that by sitting in that chair, by ordering that wine, I had placed myself directly in the orbit of the only people who could understand the blueprints of a broken life. And then I heard a sound that made me freeze. The mother, Evelyn, stood up and walked toward the restroom. She had to pass right by my tiny table. As she passed, her sleeve caught the edge of my wine menu, knocking it to the floor. She stopped. She turned. She looked right at me. "Oh, I am so clumsy," she said, her voice rich and melodic, completely unlike the shrill tone of my own mother. She bent down to pick it up, and in that moment, the distance between the scapegoat and the matriarch vanished. I held my breath, waiting for her to ignore me, to walk away. But she didn't. She looked at the bottle of wine on my table, then at my face, and her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was reading a floor plan she hadn't expected to find. "That is a very bold vintage for one person," she said softly. I gripped the stem of my glass. "I'm celebrating." "Oh? What are you celebrating?" I looked her dead in the eye, the alcohol giving me a courage I didn't know I had. "I'm celebrating the fact that I'm not in Chicago," I said. The corner of her mouth lifted. It wasn't a smile. It was an invitation. And just like that, the door to my old life slammed shut, and the door to something dangerous, something expensive, and something real cracked open. "I'm celebrating the fact that I'm not in Chicago," I said. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. I waited for the pity. I waited for Evelyn Sterling to look at me with that sad, soft expression people save for stray dogs and broken things. But she didn't. She looked at me with a sudden, piercing clarity. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a handkerchief. It wasn't a tissue. It was silk, cream-colored, with the initials E.S. embroidered in gold thread. She didn't hand it to me to wipe a tear because I wasn't crying. She placed it on the table next to my wine glass, like she was marking a spot. "Then you shouldn't celebrate alone," she said. "My husband hates eating with an even number of people. He says it ruins the dynamic. You'd be doing us a favor." I looked at her table. The famous neurosurgeon Dr. Arthur Sterling, the rising star prosecutor Julian Sterling, and the other couple, presumably the older son and his wife. This wasn't a dinner. It was a summit meeting. "I don't want to intrude," I said, my voice failing to match the confidence of my black dress. "Nonsense," she smiled. It was a dangerous smile. "We have an empty chair, and you have a very good bottle of wine." 2 minutes later, a waiter was moving my glass and my $300 Cabernet to the Sterling table. The physical anchor of the moment was the sound of the chair scraping against the hardwood floor, a harsh, grating noise that announced my arrival. I sat down, and suddenly, the silence of my studio apartment felt a million miles away. "This is Ivy," Evelyn announced, sitting down and smoothing her napkin. "She's a refugee from Chicago." Arthur Sterling looked up from his plate. He had eyes like lasers, the kind that had spent 40 years looking inside people's brains. "Chicago? Terrible traffic. Good architecture, though. I'm Arthur." "Ivy," I managed to say. "And this is Julian," Arthur pointed to the man across from me. Julian didn't smile politely. He leaned back, swirling his scotch, studying me. "Refugee, huh? That implies you're fleeing a war zone. Who's the enemy? The state or the family? Julian, Evelyn warned. The family, I said, surprising myself. The state has better laws about fair treatment. Julian's eyebrows shot up. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He wasn't seeing a sad girl anymore. He was seeing a witness who knew how to testify. Touché, he murmured. The conversation moved fast. In my family, dinner conversation was about gossip, who got fat, who got fired, who was failing. Here, it was about ideas. They argued about city zoning laws, about the ethics of medical patents, and about the history of the building we were sitting in. It's a marvel, Arthur said, gesturing to the vaulted ceiling above us. Late 19th century Gothic revival. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. Look at those arches, solid limestone. They built things to last back then. I looked up. I squinted against the ambient lighting. My architect's brain kicked in, the part of me that spent 12 hours a day analyzing stress fractures and material integrity. I saw what Arthur didn't see. It's not limestone, I said. The table went quiet. Arthur blinked. Excuse me? I felt a flush of panic. The old Ivy, the peacekeeper, would have shut up. She would have nodded and agreed to make the powerful man feel smart. But the peacekeeper was back in the studio with a frozen turkey dinner. It's a reproduction, I said, my voice gaining strength. Look at the hairline cracks near the corbels. See that spiderweb pattern? I pointed. All 4 Sterlings looked up. If that were real limestone or even traditional lime mortar, it wouldn't crack like that, I explained, slipping into the technical language that was my only shield. Lime mortar breathes. It moves with the building settling. It heals itself. That, I gestured to the gold-leafed arch, that's modern gypsum plaster over a steel mesh. It dries too hard and too fast. It's rigid. So when the building shifts in the winter, the plaster snaps. I looked back at Arthur. It's a beautiful lie, Dr. Sterling, but it's not structural. It's just a facade designed to look expensive. Silence. Total, absolute silence. I gripped my napkin under the table, convinced I had just insulted the host and ruined everything. I had called their fancy restaurant a fake. Then Arthur started to laugh. It was a booming, genuine laugh. A fake! Did you hear that, Evelyn? I've been paying a premium for ambiance and we're eating under drywall. He looked at me with delight. You have a sharp eye, Ivy. What do you do? I'm a restoration architect, I said. I specialize in historical preservation. I fix things that are falling apart. And she spots the fraud, Julian said. His voice was low, cutting through his father's laughter. I turned to face him. Julian wasn't laughing. He was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. As a prosecutor, his job was to find the inconsistencies in a story, to find the lie hidden in the truth. He had just watched me dismantle the room's illusion in 10 seconds. So, Julian asked, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table, if the ceiling is a lie, what keeps it up? The steel beams hidden underneath, I answered, not backing down. The ugly stuff nobody wants to see. That's what carries the weight. Like you, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He had decoded me. In one sentence, he had looked past the silk dress and the expensive wine and saw the load-bearing steel underneath. He saw the girl who carried the weight so the rest of the structure could look pretty. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was the terrifying thrill of being seen. For 27 years, my family had looked right through me. Now, a stranger had seen my skeleton in 5 minutes. "You're dangerous, Ivy," Julian said, raising his glass. "I like it." Arthur poured more wine into my glass. Evelyn touched my arm lightly. The conversation flowed on, but something had shifted. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was a player. As I took another sip of the cab, I realized I had walked into this restaurant to escape my family, but I was leaving with something much more volatile: allies. But as I laughed at Arthur's joke, I didn't notice the phone vibrating in my clutch. It was a text from Bella. Just one line that would pull me back from this dream and remind me that the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The screen lit up in the darkness of my bag. "Where are you? Mom is crying. Fix this." I looked at the message. Then I looked at the Sterlings. I turned the phone off. I wasn't fixing anything tonight. Tonight, I was letting it all burn. I slid my phone under the heavy linen napkin, but I could still feel it vibrating against the mahogany table. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Each vibration was a demand from the life I was trying to escape. My mother was crying. Bella was stressed. My father was disappointed. The unholy trinity of my guilt. "Don't hide the evidence," Julian said quietly. I looked up. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at the napkin vibrating like a wounded bird. "It's just family stuff," I lied. "It's complicated." "Complicated is a word people use when they're afraid to say abusive," Evelyn said. She wasn't eating anymore. She had placed her silverware down in a perfect parallel line, a habit from her days on the bench. When Judge Evelyn Sterling put down her fork, the court was in session. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab my coat and flee back to my cold apartment, where I could apologize to my mother for ruining her Thanksgiving by existing. That was the programming, wasn't it? The scapegoat's job is to absorb the pain so the golden child doesn't have to. "Show me," Evelyn said. It wasn't a request. I pulled the phone out. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen. I navigated to the Instagram photo, the perfect table, the 5 chairs, the seamless circle of a family that had surgically removed me. I slid the phone across the white tablecloth toward her. I expected her to say, "Oh, honey, that's sad." I expected the soft, useless comfort of a stranger. Evelyn put on her reading glasses. She didn't look sad. She looked clinical. She zoomed in on the photo, her eyes scanning the pixels like she was reviewing a crime scene photo in a murder trial. Arthur leaned in, squinting at the screen. Julian just watched me, his face unreadable. "Look at the spacing," Evelyn murmured to Arthur. "See the distance between the cutlery? They didn't just remove a chair. They remeasured the entire table." She looked up at me, taking off her glasses. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying intelligence. "Ivy, do you know what this is?" she asked. It's them moving on," I whispered. "No," she said sharply. "In legal terms, we call this systematic abandonment. This isn't an impulsive act of anger. An impulse is shouting at someone to leave. This," she tapped the screen, "this is premeditated. They had to plan this. They had to move the furniture. They had to set the table. They had to take the photo. They had to write the caption. That requires intent. That requires malice." I felt a lump form in my throat. "But Mom said Bella is fragile. She said I caused drama." Maybe I do. Objection, Julian said softly. Assumes facts not in evidence. Evelyn ignored him and kept her eyes locked on mine. That is the gaslighting, Ivy. They have convinced you that your reaction to their abuse is the problem, rather than the abuse itself. You aren't drama. You are a mirror. When you walk into that house, you reflect their failures back at them. That's why they can't look at you. She reached across the table and took the phone. She turned it face down. Tell me, she said. If you hired a contractor to build a house and they used rotten wood, stole your money, and blamed you when the roof collapsed, what would you do? I'd sue them, I said automatically. I'd fire them. Exactly, Evelyn leaned back. You would terminate the contract. But this is family, I protested weakly. It's blood. You can't fire family. Who told you that? Evelyn asked. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming deadly serious. Biology is an accident. Family is a social contract. It's an agreement. Parents agree to provide safety, love, and support. Children agree to respect and grow. That is the deal. She picked up her wine glass, the crystal catching the light. Your parents have been in breach of contract for a very long time, Ivy. They have failed to provide the basic services required by the parent-child agreement. And tonight, she gestured to the phone, tonight, they publicly voided the warranty. I stared at her. The noise of the restaurant faded away. For 27 years, I had thought I was a bad daughter. I thought I was a defective product that needed to be fixed. But Evelyn was handing me a different lens. I wasn't defective. I was a client who had been scammed. When a contract is breached, Evelyn continued, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet, the injured party has the right to walk away without penalty. You don't owe them loyalty. You don't owe them explanations. And you certainly don't owe them your tears. I looked down at my hands. They were still trembling, but not from fear anymore. They were trembling from the shock of the truth. So I just stop? I asked. I just stop trying? You don't just stop, Julian said. He reached over and poured the last of the $300 wine into my glass. You liquidate the asset. You cut the loss. You stop investing in a company that's going bankrupt. I picked up the glass. I looked at the dark red liquid. I thought about the text message from Bella demanding I fix this. I thought about my mother's tears, which were always weaponized to make me comply. A contract, I whispered. A bad one, Evelyn corrected. And you, my dear, are the only one with the power to shred it. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted different now. It didn't taste like rebellion anymore. It tasted like clarity. I wasn't a victim of a cruel family. I was a free agent. We finished dinner in a different kind of mood. We weren't strangers anymore. We were co-conspirators. As we walked out of the Gilded Reserve into the biting Boston cold, I felt strangely warm. The snow was still falling, covering the dirty slush on the street. Do you need a ride? Arthur asked as the valet brought around a sleek black sedan. No, I said. I need to walk. I need to think. Be careful, Ivy, Evelyn said, buttoning her coat. When you stop playing their game, they don't just let you leave. They will try to drag you back. They need their scapegoat. Without you, they'll have to eat each other. I watched them drive away, their taillights fading into the white night. I stood alone on the corner, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was vibrating again. Another call from Mom. I looked at the screen. I didn't feel the panic. I didn't feel the guilt. I just felt administrative. I swiped the decline button. It was a small motion, a simple slide of a finger. But as the screen went dark, I knew Evelyn was right. I had just voided the contract. But as I turned to walk toward the subway, I didn't know that breaking the contract was the easy part. Enforcing it was going to be a war I hadn't even begun to prepare for. And I certainly didn't know that my breach of contract had just triggered a clause in my mother's mind that would make her come for the only thing I had left: my reputation. The sound of a jackhammer is violent, loud, and relentless. To most people, it's a headache. To me, it was the sound of healing. 2 years had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner at the Gilded Reserve, and my life had become unrecognizable. I wasn't the girl crying over a frozen turkey anymore. I was standing on scaffolding, 50 feet in the air, my hands covered in gray stone dust, touching the face of the Boston Public Library. I had won the bid. Me, the failed daughter, the difficult sister. I was the lead architect on the city's most prestigious restoration project, tasked with saving the historic McKim building. "Watch the stress point on the cornice," I shouted down to the foreman. "That marble is heavy. Treat it like glass." I ran my hand over the cold sienna marble. From the street, the library looked solid, invincible. But up close, it was riddled with microfractures. It was tired. My job wasn't just to clean it. It was to install a hidden steel skeleton behind the stone. We drilled deep into the masonry, inserting stainless steel anchors that nobody would ever see. These anchors took the weight off the old stone, allowing it to stand tall without crumbling. That was exactly what the Sterling family had done for me. Every Sunday for 104 weeks, I showed up at their house. I didn't knock anymore. I had a key. Evelyn didn't treat me like a guest. She treated me like a daughter. She taught me how to dress for board meetings, how to order wine without looking at the price, and most importantly, how to stop apologizing for taking up space. Arthur taught me about history and legacy. They were my hidden steel anchors. They took the weight of my trauma so I could finally stand up. "You're frowning at the stone again," a voice called out. I turned around on the narrow scaffolding. Julian was standing there, wearing a hard hat that looked ridiculous with his 3-piece suit. He was holding 2 coffees. The wind whipped his tie around, but he didn't flinch. He never flinched. "It's not the stone," I said, taking the coffee. "It's the mortar. It's stubborn." "Like you," he grinned. Our relationship had evolved in the space between arguments. We didn't do candlelit dinners and roses. We did late-night debates about zoning laws and ethics. We reviewed case files and blueprints on his living room floor. He fell in love with my brain first, my scars second. He didn't want to save me. He wanted to sharpen me. "I have news," Julian said, leaning against the safety rail, looking out over Copley Square. "Good or bad?" "The firm made me junior partner." I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "That's amazing, Julian. You deserve it." "And," he continued, turning to face me, his eyes intense, "I found a loophole in the city zoning for your library project. You can expand the atrium if you classify it as a public egress. I filed the paperwork this morning." My heart skipped a beat. He had spent his own time, his own energy, to help me win a battle I hadn't even told him I was fighting. That was the difference. My biological family only called when they needed money. Julian gave me solutions before I even asked for help. "Why?" I asked quietly. He stepped closer, invading my personal space in the best way possible. "Because I like watching you win, Ivy. You spent your whole life losing on purpose so your sister could feel big. I want to see what happens when you actually try." He touched my cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of stone dust. It was an intimate gesture, possessive and tender all at once. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just useful. I was wanted. "You're going to get your suit dirty," I whispered. "I'll buy a new one," he said, and then he kissed me. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was grounding. It tasted like coffee and cold air and stability. Standing there, high above the city, held by a man who knew exactly who I was and loved me anyway, I felt invincible. I had the career, I had the family, I had the love. The restoration was almost complete. The cracks were filled, the structure was sound. I looked down at the street below. People looked like ants. I felt safe. I felt untouchable. But in architecture, we have a rule. The most dangerous cracks are the ones you can't see. I checked my phone as we climbed down the scaffolding. It had been 2 years of silence from my parents. 2 years of absolute radio silence. No angry texts, no guilt-tripping voicemails. I thought they had finally let me go. I thought they had accepted the new boundary. I was so naive. I put my phone in my pocket, feeling the warmth of Julian's hand on my back. I didn't know that silence wasn't peace. Silence was strategy. While I was busy rebuilding my life, my sister Bella had been busy too. She wasn't building anything. She was digging. And she had just hit something that was going to shake the ground beneath my feet harder than any jackhammer ever could. The engine of the Porsche Panamera didn't roar. It purred, a low, deep vibration that I could feel in the soles of my feet. I pulled into the driveway of the townhouse on Beacon Hill, my townhouse. It wasn't a rental. It wasn't a fixer-upper I was scraping by to afford. It was mine, paid for with the bonus from the library restoration project and the 3 other historical landmarks I had saved in the last 18 months. I turned off the ignition, and the silence inside the car was total. I stepped out, my heels clicking on the cobblestones. I walked around the front of the car and stopped. There it was. A 2-inch scratch on the left headlight. I had grazed a concrete pillar in the parking garage 3 weeks ago. My mother would have had a breakdown. If this were the Sterling car in Chicago, Mom would have screamed. She would have called it a tragedy. She would have rushed it to the shop immediately because appearances are everything. But I just ran my thumb over the rough plastic. I hadn't fixed it. I didn't care. That scratch was proof that the car worked for me, not the other way around. I didn't serve my possessions anymore. I walked up the steps to the heavy black door. I punched in the code, not a key, a code, and the lock slid open with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside, the house smelled like fresh lilies and success. Julian was in the kitchen, opening a bottle of champagne. He looked up, his tie loosened, a grin spreading across his face. "To the new partner," he said, raising the glass. "To the new partner," I echoed, taking the flute. It had happened at 2 p.m. that afternoon. The senior partners of the firm had called me into the glass conference room. They didn't ask me to get coffee. They didn't ask me to take notes. They asked me to sign the operating agreement. Ivy Chen, no, Ivy Sterling in spirit, if not on paper yet, was now the youngest partner in the firm's history. My signature was worth millions in liability and assets. I took a sip of the champagne. It was cold and sharp. "Did you call them?" Julian asked. He didn't have to specify who "them" was. I pulled my phone out of my bag. I opened Instagram. Bella had posted 20 minutes ago. It was a picture of her holding a generic latte with the caption, "Treating myself, #blessed, #rich life." She was wearing a bracelet I knew was fake gold, posing in front of a store she couldn't afford to shop in. Then I looked at my own profile. The last photo was from 3 years ago, a picture of a sunset. "No," I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. "I didn't." Julian leaned against the marble island. "They think you're still living in that studio, don't they? They think you're barely scraping by." "They think I'm the failure," I said, walking over to the window to look out at the city I was literally helping to rebuild. "Let them." This was the greatest power I had ever tasted. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the house. It was the information gap. For my entire life, I had performed for them. I had danced for their approval, showed them my grades, my awards, begging for a scrap of love. And they had starved me. Now, I was a feast, and I wasn't inviting them to the table. "Silence is a weapon, Julian," I whispered, watching the streetlights flicker on. If they knew I was successful, they would want something. They would claim it was their genes, their parenting. They would try to harvest my harvest. "You're a titan, Ivy," Julian said softly, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. "A hidden titan. That's the most dangerous kind." I leaned into him. I felt safe. I felt powerful. I had built a fortress of success, and the best part was that my enemies didn't even know it existed. They were still attacking the empty shack I left behind years ago. "I have a surprise for you," Julian whispered into my ear. "Check your email." I frowned and pulled my phone back out. I opened my inbox. There was an email from the Massachusetts Vital Records Office. Subject, "Petition for name change and adult adoption. Review complete." My breath hitched. We had filed the papers quietly, Evelyn, Arthur, and I. It was the final step, the legal erasure of the Chen legacy. "It's happening," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "It's actually happening." "You're going to be a Sterling," Julian kissed my neck. "Legally, officially, forever." I turned around and hugged him, burying my face in his chest. The smell of his cologne, cedar and rain, filled my senses. I was so happy. I was so incredibly, stupidly happy. I thought I had won. I thought the war was over because the enemy had stopped shooting. But I forgot one thing about parasites. They don't need to see you to find you. They just need to smell the blood. A notification popped up on my phone screen, lighting up the dim kitchen. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a text. It was a Google alert I had set up years ago and forgotten about. New mention: Ivy Chen, architect, Boston. I froze. I pulled away from Julian and looked at the screen. My heart stopped. It was a link to a Business Insider article. "Rising Stars of Restoration: How Ivy Chen is Saving Boston's History." The article had been published 10 minutes ago. It listed my firm. It listed my projects. And right there, in the second paragraph, it estimated my net worth. "Oh no," I whispered. "What?" Julian asked, his smile fading. "The silence," I said, looking up at him with terror in my eyes. "It just broke." I didn't know it yet, but in a cheap apartment in Chicago, Bella was scrolling through her phone, bored and jealous, when she typed my name into Google just to make herself feel better about my failure. She wasn't going to find failure. She was going to find a gold mine, and she knew exactly where to dig. The diamond on my finger was heavy, but the leather folder sitting on the coffee table was heavier. Julian had proposed an hour ago, right there in the kitchen, amidst the smell of champagne and the terrifying glow of that Business Insider article. I had said yes, of course. Marrying Julian was the easiest decision of my life. He was my partner, my equal, my safe harbor. But as we sat in the living room of the Sterling estate later that evening, the air didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom before a verdict. Arthur and Evelyn sat opposite us. They weren't drinking champagne. They were holding pens. "We need to talk about the wedding," Arthur said, his voice grave. "But before we talk about the wedding, we need to talk about the bride." My stomach tightened. I thought they were going to ask for a prenup. It would make sense. They were a dynasty. I was a liability with a toxic family attached. I straightened my back, ready to negotiate. I was a partner now. I could handle a contract. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. "You want to protect the family assets. I'm happy to sign whatever—" "Stop," Evelyn interrupted gently. She slid the thick leather folder across the mahogany table. It made a heavy thud, the sound of a judge's gavel hitting the block. "This isn't a prenup, Ivy. This is a birth certificate." I stared at the folder. "I don't understand." "Open it," Julian whispered beside me. He knew. He had always known. I opened the folder. The first page wasn't a contract about money. It was a petition to the Massachusetts Probate and Family Court. At the top, in bold black letters, it read, "Petition for adult adoption." I froze. My architect's brain tried to process the data, but the logic failed. "But I'm 29 years old." "Chapter 210 of the Massachusetts General Laws," Arthur recited, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. "It allows for the adoption of a person younger than the petitioner, regardless of age. It's not just ceremonial, Ivy. It's total. It's absolute." He reached over and turned the page to the legal implications section. "When you sign this," Arthur continued, "it terminates all legal relationships with your biological parents. They lose standing as your next of kin. If you are in a coma tomorrow, they don't make the medical decisions. We do. If you die without a will, they don't get a dime. We do. And more importantly," Evelyn finished his sentence, her voice trembling slightly, "it means you are our daughter. Not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law. You become Ivy Sterling. A new birth certificate will be issued. The old one, the one that says Chen, will be sealed forever." I looked at the papers. I saw the lines waiting for signatures. This wasn't just a legal procedure. It was a soul contract. For 29 years, I had been tethered to people who saw me as a resource to be harvested. I was their retirement plan, their punching bag, their emotional janitor. This document was a pair of scissors. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You know who I come from. You know the damage." "We aren't choosing where you came from," Evelyn said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. Her skin was warm, grounding. "We are choosing who you are. We chose you at the restaurant. We chose you when you were broken. And we are choosing you now that you are strong." I looked at Julian. He nodded. "It's the ultimate firewall, Ivy. If they come for you, and they will after that article, They won't find Ivy Chen. She won't exist anymore. The physical anchor of the moment was the pen Arthur placed in my hand. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy, black resin with gold trim. It felt cold against my sweating palm. I looked at the signature line, adoptee. I thought about my biological father, sitting in his recliner, ignoring me. I thought about my mother, setting the table for 5 instead of 6. I thought about Bella, living her life on the fuel of my sacrifice. They had breached the contract of family decades ago. Today, I was just formalizing the eviction. I uncapped the pen. The ink was black and permanent. I pressed the nib to the paper. The scratch of the pen sounded loud in the quiet room. Ivy, I wrote. I paused. My hand wanted to write Chen out of habit. It was the name I had written on every architectural drawing, every exam, every check. But that name belonged to a victim. I took a breath and finished the signature. Sterling. I set the pen down. It was done. The paper seemed to glow under the lamp. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. Not joy exactly, but a massive release of pressure. Like a steel beam had finally been installed to support a crumbling wall. "Welcome home," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn stood up and hugged me, holding me tighter than my own mother ever had. "My daughter," she whispered into my hair. "My real daughter." I closed my eyes, letting the safety wash over me. I was Ivy Sterling. I was legally protected. I was loved. But as we celebrated, clinking crystal glasses in the warm light of the library, I didn't hear the vibration of my phone on the table. I didn't see the screen lighting up with a string of text messages that were arriving like missiles. The Business Insider article had been shared. The algorithm had done its work. The silence was over. Ivy Chen was legally dead, but the ghosts of her past had just found her address. And they weren't coming to pay their respects. They were coming to collect a debt I no longer owed. The vibration against the mahogany table wasn't a notification. It was a heartbeat, fast and irregular. I looked down at the screen. Bella, then Mom, then Bella again. The names flashed like warning lights on a dashboard right before the engine blows. I didn't pick up. I just watched the preview messages stack up one after another, transforming my peaceful evening into a crime scene of digital harassment. "Ivy? OMG, I just saw the article. Is that you? Business Insider says you're a partner? Call me back, now. It's an emergency." I felt Julian's hand tense over mine. "Don't answer," he said. "Let it ring." I didn't answer. I sipped my champagne, but the bubbles felt flat in my mouth. My stomach churned. It wasn't the surprise of them finding me. I knew that was inevitable. It was the speed. The article had been out for less than an hour. They must have been watching. They must have been Googling my name every single week, waiting for a slip-up, waiting for a sign of life they could latch onto. Then came the voicemail notification. I put the phone on speaker. The room was silent, filled only by the expensive scent of lilies and the crackle of the fireplace, until Bella's voice tore through the air. "Ivy! Oh my God, Sissy! I can't believe it! We're so proud of you! Why didn't you tell us? We miss you so much! Call me! We have to celebrate!" Her voice was high-pitched, breathless. It was a performance. It was the love bomb. I looked at Julian. She sounds happy, I whispered, the old guilt flaring up for a split second. Maybe she really was proud. No, Julian said, his prosecutor eyes narrowing. Listen to the background noise. I played it again. Behind Bella's fake squeals of joy, I heard a man shouting. I heard the crash of something breaking. It was her husband, Mark. That's not a celebration, Julian said. That's desperation. He pulled out his laptop and started typing. Julian didn't guess. He investigated. While my phone continued to buzz with I love you texts from a mother who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, Julian pulled up the public records for Bella's husband. Here it is, he said, turning the screen toward me. I looked at the numbers. They were red. Deep, bloody red. Mark had leveraged their house, their cars, and maxed out 5 credit cards to buy into a cryptocurrency scheme that had collapsed last month. They weren't just broke. They were drowning. They were facing foreclosure. The golden child was about to lose her shine, and she was terrified. They don't want a reunion, Ivy, Julian said, closing the laptop. They want a bailout. The realization hit me like a slap. They didn't care about my restoration projects. They didn't care that I had found love. They only cared that the Business Insider article estimated my net worth at $2 million. To them, I wasn't a sister. I was a lottery ticket they had forgotten to cash. The vibration on the table changed rhythm. The love bombing phase was over. When I didn't reply to the I love you texts within 10 minutes, the mask slipped. The messages shifted from sweet to sour instantly. You're too good to talk to us now? We raised you. We fed you. You owe us. Don't forget who paid for your clothes growing up. I stared at the screen. The urge to fight back was overwhelming. I wanted to type, you charged me rent when I was 16. You made me pay for my own prom dress. I wanted to scream the truth at them. But I remembered Evelyn's advice. The gray rock method. Be as boring as a rock. Be uninteresting. Give them nothing to feed on. No anger, no tears, no explanations. Narcissists feed on reaction. If you starve them of reaction, they starve. I picked up the phone. I didn't block them, not yet. I needed the evidence for the restraining order Julian was already drafting in his head. I simply turned the phone face down. I'm not doing this, I said, my voice calm though my hands were shaking. I'm not their ATM. I'm not their emotional dumpster. Good, Julian said. Let them scream into the void. We tried to go back to our celebration. We tried to eat the dinner Evelyn had prepared. But the phone kept buzzing against the wood. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It was psychological warfare. They were trying to break the siege by sheer volume of noise. Then, the buzzing stopped. Silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Had they given up? They stopped, I whispered, relaxing my shoulders. Maybe they got the hint. Julian didn't look convinced. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. Desperate people don't just give up, Ivy. They change tactics. My phone lit up one last time. It wasn't a text from Bella. It was a photo message from my mother. I hesitated, then picked it up. It was a photo of a building. My building. The firm's headquarters is in downtown Boston. The caption was short, simple, and terrifying. See you tomorrow, sweetheart. We're driving up. We have so much to discuss. My blood ran cold. They weren't just screaming into the void anymore. They were coming here. They were crossing state lines. They were bringing their chaos, their debt, and their rage to my front door. I looked at Julian, panic rising in my throat. I had built a fortress, yes, but I had forgotten that even the strongest fortress has a gate, and tomorrow morning, they were going to try to batter it down. The sound of the elevator pinging on the 40th floor usually meant a client was arriving, someone with money, taste, and an appointment. But today, the ping sounded like a warning shot. I was standing at my drafting table, reviewing the blueprints for the library atrium, when the commotion started. My office walls are floor-to-ceiling glass. It's a design choice meant to project transparency and leadership, but transparency has a downside. It lets the monsters see exactly where you are. I looked up and saw my assistant Sarah trying to block the hallway. She's a tough girl from South Boston, but she was no match for the hurricane that was Linda Chen. My mother pushed past Sarah like she was swatting away a fly. Bella trailed behind her, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and clutching a designer bag that I knew for a fact was a knockoff. They didn't knock. They threw the glass door open so hard it shuddered against the stopper. "Look at you," my mother spat, before I could even open my mouth. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. Her eyes swept over my mahogany desk, my architectural awards, the panoramic view of the city I was helping to build. "Sitting here like a queen in your glass castle, while your sister loses everything." I didn't move. I stayed behind my desk. It was my barricade. "You can't be here," I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were trembling under the table. "This is a place of business." "Business?" Bella pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and puffy, a performance she had perfected since kindergarten. She threw herself into the client chair opposite me. "We are your business, Ivy. I'm pregnant. Again. And Mark lost the house. We're going to be on the street in a month. And you're driving a Porsche?" "I worked for that car," I said. "And I worked for this office. Something you wouldn't understand." "Don't you dare judge me!" Bella screamed, her voice cracking. "You think you're better than us? You think because you changed your name, you can forget where you came from?" So they knew. They knew about the adoption. The article hadn't mentioned it, which meant they had dug deeper. They had hunted for my records. "What do you want?" I asked. I needed to cut to the chase. I needed them out. My mother stepped forward. She placed her hands flat on my pristine glass desk, leaving greasy smudges. She leaned in, her face inches from mine. The mask of the concerned mother dropped, revealing the cold calculator underneath. "We don't want your charity, Ivy. We want what's fair. You've been hoarding money for years while we struggled. We need $500,000. I blinked. $500,000? You're insane! "It's a loan," Mom said quickly, though we both knew that was a lie. "To save the family home, to help Bella get settled. It's the least you can do after all the pain you've caused." "Pain I caused?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. You erased me from the family photos. You pretended I didn't exist until you saw a net worth estimate in a magazine." "And we can put you back in the magazines," Bella said. Her voice dropped. The tears vanished instantly. This was the specific malice Evelyn had warned me about. This wasn't desperation. It was a shakedown. Imagine what Business Insider would say if they knew the new partner of this prestigious firm let her pregnant sister and elderly parents starve. Imagine the scandal, Ivy. Architect builds monuments but destroys her own family. We'll give interviews. We'll cry on camera. We'll ruin you. I looked at them. Really looked at them. For 27 years, I had seen my mother and sister as powerful forces of nature that I had to appease. I had seen them as the weather, unpredictable, dangerous, inevitable. But looking at them now, in the harsh fluorescent light of my office, I didn't see power. I saw rot. In architecture, we deal with something called dry rot. It's a fungus that eats wood from the inside out. It looks solid on the surface, but underneath, the structural integrity is gone. It's infectious. It spreads to everything it touches. You cannot repair dry rot. You cannot negotiate with it or paint over it. If you leave even a spore, it comes back. You have to cut it out. No, I said. My mother blinked. Excuse me? No money, no loans, no help. I stood up. I was taller than they were in my heels. You are not a family in need. You are a structural failure, and I am not going to let you collapse on top of me. You ungrateful little bitch, Mom hissed, reaching for a heavy glass paperweight on my desk. I didn't flinch. I reached under the desk and pressed the button I had been hovering over for the last 3 minutes. Security, I said into the intercom, never breaking eye contact with my mother. I have 2 intruders in the partner's office. They are making threats. Remove them. Now. You wouldn't, Bella gasped. We're your blood. I have new blood now, I said. The door opened behind them. 2 large, uniformed guards stepped in. They didn't care about family drama. They cared about the woman whose name was on the door. Ma'am, the lead guard said to my mother, taking her arm. Time to go. Get off me, Mom shrieked, trashing against the guard's grip. It was humiliating. It was ugly. It was exactly the kind of scene I had spent my life trying to avoid, but strangely, I felt no shame. The shame belonged to them. As they were dragged toward the door, Bella twisted around. She dug her heels into the carpet, desperate to land one last blow. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a demon. You think this is over? She screamed, her voice echoing down the hallway for my entire staff to hear. We know about the wedding, Ivy. We saw the registry. You think you can get married without us? We'll be there. We'll show up and we'll burn it all down. You hear me? You'll never be free of us. The elevator doors closed, cutting off her screams. Silence rushed back into the room, but it wasn't peaceful. I looked at the smudges my mother's hands had left on my desk. They were greasy and gross. I grabbed a bottle of cleaning spray and a cloth. I scrubbed the glass until my arm ached, trying to erase the physical trace of them. But as I wiped away the fingerprints, Bella's threat echoed in my ears. We'll be there. I knew she meant it. They had crossed state lines to extort me. Crossing a wedding venue security line would be nothing to them. I dropped the cleaning cloth and picked up my phone. I needed to call Julian. I needed to call Arthur. The Grey Rock method had failed. The fortress had been breached. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to set a trap. The pen snapped. It was a cheap plastic stick Julian had picked up from the counter, but the sound was loud enough to cut through the tension in our living room. Julian was pacing back and forth, holding a stack of legal documents that were thick enough to kill a spider. He looked like a prosecutor ready for a murder trial, not a groom preparing for his wedding.
It's a slam dunk, Ivy.
Julian said, slamming the papers onto the coffee table. Criminal trespass, extortion, harassment. I can get a restraining order signed by Judge Murphy in 20 minutes. The police will arrest them if they come within 500 feet of the venue. I looked at the papers. Civil harassment restraining order. It looked safe. It looked logical. It was exactly what a sane person would do. No, I said. Julian stopped pacing. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Ivy, they threatened to burn down the wedding. They came to your office. This isn't a game. You're right. It's not a game. It's a war, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. A restraining order is just a piece of paper, Julian. It keeps them away, sure, but it lets them play the victim. They'll go back to Chicago and tell everyone that their rich, heartless daughter sent the police to ban them from her big day. They'll spin the story. They'll survive. I stood up and walked to the window. I don't want them to survive. I want a public execution. A what? A moral execution, I clarified, turning to face him. I want them to walk into that wedding. I want them to think they've won. I want them to expose exactly who they are in front of the most powerful people in Boston. And then, when they are standing in the spotlight, thinking they are about to get their money, I want to crush them. Completely. Legally. Publicly. Julian stared at me for a long time. Then, a slow, dark smile spread across his face. He dropped the restraining order into the trash can. You really are a sterling, he whispered. The next morning, the air at the venue was crisp and cold. The winery was beautiful, a sprawling estate of stone and glass that I had chosen specifically for its acoustics. But I wasn't there to check the flowers. I was there to meet Mr. Vance, the head of security. We stood in the reception hall looking at the seating chart. It was a giant board with hundreds of names. Okay, Miss Sterling, Vance said, tapping his clipboard. We have their photos. If Linda or Bella Chen show up at the gate, we turn them away. Quietly. No, I said, pulling a red marker from my pocket. If they show up, you welcome them. Vance blinked. Ma'am? You welcome them, I repeated. You apologize for the mix-up with the invitations. You treat them like VIPs. And then I drew a red circle around a table right near the front, but off to the side, directly in the line of sight of the podium. You seat them here. That's the overflow table, Vance noted. It's isolated. Exactly. It looks important because it's close to the front, but it's separated from the main family cluster. It's a stage, Mr. Vance. I'm giving them a stage. I handed him the marker. They are going to try to make a scene. They are going to wait for the speeches. Do not stop them until I give the signal. Do you understand? You want them to interrupt the wedding. I'm counting on it, I said. Vance nodded, closing his folder. He looked a little scared of me. Good. I walked back to the bridal suite. The room was full of white roses and soft music, but inside my head, it was silent. I sat down at the vanity and looked in the mirror. 5 years ago, I had looked into a mirror in a tiny studio apartment and seen a girl with red eyes and a broken heart. I had seen a victim. Today, the woman in the mirror was different. I wasn't trembling. My skin wasn't blotchy from crying. My eyes were clear, sharp, and cold. I touched the diamond necklace Evelyn had loaned me. a family heirloom that carried the weight of generations. I didn't feel like an imposter wearing it. I felt like a warrior putting on armor. "You're not Ivy Chen," I whispered to my reflection. Ivy Chen was a mouse. You are a titan. I picked up my lipstick. Red. Not a soft pink, but a deep blood red. I applied it slowly, watching my mouth transform. I wasn't painting a face. I was painting war paint. There was a knock on the door. It was Sarah, my assistant, looking pale. "Ivy," she said, her voice shaking. "Security just radioed. A beat-up Honda just pulled up to the main gate. It's them." My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. Not fear, anticipation. "Are they inside?" I asked, capping my lipstick. "Yes. Vance is escorting them to the table now. He said your mother is demanding to speak to the manager about the champagne quality." I laughed. I actually laughed. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. They had walked right in. They thought they were crashing a party, but they had just walked into a courtroom, and they had no idea that the verdict had already been written. "Let them get comfortable, Sarah," I said, standing up and smoothing my silk dress. "Let them drink the champagne. Let them think they own the place. Because in 1 hour, I'm going to take everything they have left." I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The music was starting, the guests were waiting, and my victims had just taken their seats. The glass of my champagne flute was cold, but my blood was boiling hot. From the head table, I had a perfect view of the trap I had set. There they were, sitting at the isolated table near the front, sticking out like a neon sign in a room of candlelight. My mother was wearing a dress that was too bright, too loud, and suspiciously close to white. Bella was already on her 3rd glass of free wine, her laughter shrill and forced, trying to catch the eye of anyone who looked important. My father just sat there, small and silent, looking at his plate like he wished he could dissolve into the tablecloth. They looked comfortable. They looked like they had won. They thought they had bullied their way back into the narrative. I felt Julian's hand squeeze mine under the table. "Ready?" he whispered. "Showtime," I said. The music faded. The room went quiet. The MC, a man with a voice like melted chocolate, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before we continue the celebration, the bride and groom would like to acknowledge the people who made this day possible." My mother straightened up. I saw her adjust her hair. She was preparing her face for the spotlight. She was ready to stand up, wave, and reclaim her property. She was ready to be the mother of the partner. "Please join me," the MC continued, "in welcoming the parents of the bride, Arthur and Evelyn Sterling." The applause was thunderous. It was genuine. Arthur and Evelyn stood up, beaming, waving to the crowd that respected and adored them. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching Table 9. My mother froze. Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. Bella dropped her fork. My father looked up, confused, as if the audio feed in his brain had malfunctioned. For 5 seconds, they were paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what they had just heard. Parents of the bride? Sterling? Then the rage hit. My mother stood up. She didn't stand up gracefully. She shoved her chair back so hard it screeched against the floor, a horrible sound that cut through the applause like a knife. "Excuse me!" she screamed. The clapping died instantly. 200 heads turned. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with shock. "There must be a mistake," Mom shouted, marching toward the head table. She pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. Who are you? I am her mother. I gave birth to her. This is a farce. Bella was right behind her, her face flushed. You can't just replace us, Ivy. You can't just pretend we don't exist because you found some rich people to play house with. I stood up. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator who knows the cage door is already locked. I walked around the head table and stood next to Evelyn. There is no mistake, I said into the silence. My voice didn't shake. And this isn't a farce. It's a legal fact. Legal? Mom scoffed, stepping closer, invading my personal space. You can't legislate biology, Ivy. I am your mother. You are my daughter. You owe me everything. Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't yell. She used her judge voice, the tone that had silenced courtrooms for 30 years. Mrs. Chen, she said, calm and deadly, you are trespassing, and you are harassing my daughter. Your daughter? Mom laughed, a manic, desperate sound. She's a Chen! Look at her face! She's mine! Not anymore, Arthur said. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to her. He held it up for the room to see. This is a decree of adult adoption, signed by the Massachusetts Probate Court. As of 3 days ago, Ivy's legal name is Ivy Sterling. Her birth certificate has been amended. Legally, you are strangers. My mother stared at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed. You adopted her? She's 29 years old. We adopted the child you threw away, Evelyn said softly. The room gasped. I saw the shame wash over my father's face. But Bella wasn't ashamed. She was furious. This is sick, Bella yelled. You stole our family. You brainwashed her. Brainwashed? I stepped forward, cutting off her tirade. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for my entire life. Bella, do you remember Thanksgiving 5 years ago? Do you remember the empty chair? Do you remember the exit agreement Mom tried to make me sign when I was 16? That was just family stuff, Bella stammered. No, I said. That was a breach of contract. I looked at my mother. You erased me from the table 5 years ago because I was too much drama. You wanted a perfect picture without me. Well, Mom, you got your wish. I'm not in your picture anymore, but you aren't in mine either. Ivy, please, my father spoke for the first time, his voice weak. We just need help. We're family. I have a family, I said, gesturing to the Sterlings. You had a daughter. You chose to treat her like a servant. You chose to treat her like a spare part. And now? Now you're just a bad debt that I've finally written off. This isn't revenge, Mom, I said, delivering the line I had rehearsed in my nightmares for years. This is just an administrative adjustment. We aren't leaving, Bella screamed, grabbing a wine bottle from a nearby table. You owe us. We know about the money. We know you're worth millions. You aren't getting rid of us until we get our share. Julian stood up. He walked over to the microphone. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, a printout. Is this the share you're looking for, Mark? Julian asked, looking directly at Bella's husband, who was cowering at table 9. What is that? Bella froze. This, Julian read calmly, is a federal indictment for wire fraud and securities fraud. It seems your husband didn't just lose money on crypto. He stole it from investors. About $2 million. The FBI has been looking for him. I just sent them his location." The color drained from Bella's face so fast she looked like a corpse. Mark bolted from his chair, knocking it over, and ran toward the exit. But the doors opened before he could get there. Mr. Vance and 2 uniformed officers were waiting. "Mark Williams?" the officer asked. The room erupted in whispers. My mother looked around, realizing that her scandal had backfired. She wasn't the victim. She was the mother of a fraudster, standing in the middle of a wedding she had tried to ruin, being disowned by the daughter she had abused. "Get them out," I said to Vance. Security moved in. They took my mother by the elbows. They grabbed Bella, who was sobbing hysterically now, not for me, but for her husband being handcuffed in the parking lot. "Ivy! Ivy, stop them!" Mom screamed as she was dragged backward. "I'm your mother! You can't do this!" I watched them go. I watched the doors close behind them. And as the heavy wood clicked shut, the silence in the room wasn't awkward anymore. It was pure. It was clean. I turned back to the crowd. My heart was pounding, but it was a good rhythm. Strong. Steady. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, lifting my champagne glass. "We had some uninvited pests, but the structure is sound now." Evelyn hugged me. Arthur clapped Julian on the back. The guests cheered, not polite applause, but a roar of support. They had seen the monster, and they had seen me slay it. I took a sip of champagne. It tasted like victory. But I knew the adrenaline would fade. I knew the silence would return. And in that silence, I would have to figure out who Ivy Sterling actually was, now that she didn't have a war to fight. The only sound left in the world was the popping of birch logs in the stone fireplace. The screaming was over. The sirens had faded hours ago. The guests had gone home, buzzing with the kind of scandalous gossip that would keep the Sterling name in the papers for weeks. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about the headlines. I sat on the rug, my expensive silk wedding dress pulled around me like a cloud, my feet bare and aching. Julian was asleep on the sofa behind me, his hand hanging down, fingertips brushing my shoulder. I took a sip of tea. It was lukewarm. I waited for the guilt. That's what they tell you about cutting off your family, isn't it? They tell you about the phantom limb pain. They tell you that no matter how abusive they were, you will miss them when they are gone. I closed my eyes and searched my chest for that pain. I searched for the regret of watching my mother being dragged out by security, screaming my name. I searched for the pity I should have felt for Bella, whose husband was currently sitting in a federal holding cell. I felt nothing. No, that's not true. I felt light. I felt like a building that had finally been stripped of the scaffolding that was choking it. "You're smiling." Evelyn's voice came from the armchair. She was still awake, watching the fire, holding a glass of cognac. "Am I?" I touched my face. I was. "It's the smile of a survivor," she said softly. "Or maybe an architect who just finished a demolition." "Both," I whispered. I looked at the scars on my hands, not physical ones, but the invisible callus I had built over 29 years. For decades, I thought these scars were ugly. I thought they were proof that I was damaged goods, a cracked foundation that no amount of mortar could fix. But sitting here, in this warm golden light, I realized the truth. Those scars weren't damaged. They were structural reinforcements. They were the steel beams I had installed in myself to survive the weight of their expectations. I spent so long trying to fix them, I said to the fire. I tried to be the perfect daughter. I tried to pay their debts. I tried to restore a house that was infested with dry rot. And what did you learn? Evelyn asked. That you can't fix dry rot, I answered, my voice steady. You can't negotiate with a fungus. You can't love a crumbling wall into being solid. Sometimes, the most moral thing you can do, the only thing you can do, is bring the wrecking ball. I reached for the leather sketchbook on the coffee table. It was brand new. The leather smelled rich and clean. I opened it to the first page. It was blank. No blueprints for a library. No renovation plans for a historic landmark. Just white space. I picked up the pen, the cheap plastic one Julian had used to sign the marriage license, not the heavy Mont Blanc of the Sterling estate. It felt light in my hand. My biological family was gone. They were a pile of rubble in the rearview mirror, dusty and chaotic. But here, on this blank page, the ground was solid. The soil was clean. I uncapped the pen and started to draw. Not a wall, not a barrier. I drew a door, an open door. What are you designing? Julian mumbled, stirring on the couch, his voice thick with sleep. I looked at the sketch. It wasn't perfect. The lines were a little shaky, but they were mine. I'm not restoring anything anymore, Julian, I whispered, pressing the ink into the paper until it bled through to the next page. I'm building something new. I looked at the blueprint of my future. It was terrifying. It was blank, and it was absolutely perfect. But as I watched the fire die down to embers, I knew one thing for sure. The next time someone knocked on my door, I would be the one deciding if it opened. And that power? That was worth every single scar.